The Young Turks 14 years.
Hello and welcome to this very special edition of Young Turks. I have with me Mr. Charles Rivkin, the Assistant Secretary of State for Economic and Business. I have with me also a whole set of young entrepreneurs, India-based, who are in varied fields. So for the next half hour, Mr. Rivkin, what we're going to do is I'm going to ask you to keep switching hats between being a former entrepreneur. I don't know if you can ever be a former entrepreneur. I think once it's in your DNA, you're always an entrepreneur, whether you're doing it in business or whether you're doing it in government. So let's start by talking a little bit about the two companies that you built up. How do you define creativity? What does creativity bring to entrepreneurship? And what does it bring to government services?
Well, that's a fantastic question. But before I respond, I just want to tell you how honored I am to be on this show. I'm a big fan of the show, and to be here with these extraordinary entrepreneurs and innovators and CEOs, because what these four gentlemen represent is exactly what binds our two countries together. We have an economic relationship that has shared passion for innovation and entrepreneurship. I think I'm the first former CEO, certainly former startup or entrepreneurial CEO, and the first former ambassador to be in charge of policy, economic policy at the U.S. State Department. And what's fun about that is that I had to make payroll. I actually know what it's like to be in your shoes, and to then be in Washington talking about economic policy, not in an ivory tower, but in a real world kind of way. And so some of the things that we're doing in government, I know are going to help this type of business. But I wanted to tell you, creativity. It's hard to define exactly what you're saying. But I found in managing creative organizations that it's a good idea to never highlight bad ideas, to let ideas nurture without finding reasons for them not to work. When I was at one of the entrepreneurial companies that I ran, we produced a children's television show that I don't think is here in India. It's called Yo Gabba Gabba, as strange as that sounds. And it's a very, very cool show, but it was started by these people that didn't believe they could ever get the show off the ground, nor did any of the networks. They turned them down. But what we did was we built a pilot and we launched it on the internet, and we had a website. The website was shut down because it had so many hits. And after it took off virally, the networks then called us again and said, you know that show we turned down? We're actually interested in doing it. It's that positive attitude, that can-do attitude that I think is common in all entrepreneurs. The ability to see into the future and believe in yourself and follow your dreams. It's so inspirational, and in my mind, so much part of the American dream. And I'll say part of the Indian dream
part
as
well. Part of the Indian dream too, yes. One of the fastest growing entrepreneurial countries in the world.
That's right.
Have you had a chance, I know this is your second visit to India, and you plan to do a lot of that on this visit. You're going on a road show across 4 cities, looking at startups, especially in the clean tech space. But have you had a chance in your previous visits to interact with entrepreneurs and startups there, and what do you make of the ecosystem?
I think it's important to engage on a state-to-state level, as in addition to engaging on a government-to-government level. But every time I go, I meet with U.S. businesses doing business in India. I was just at FICCI. I meet with Indian businesses that are doing business in the United States. I meet with entrepreneurs, in particular women entrepreneurs who have enormous potential. And we think the clean tech space is an extraordinary opportunity for both India and America. And we have these 12 companies that are meeting with entrepreneurs. They're meeting with government officials, and what we're hoping to do is highlight what we do well, highlight how American entrepreneurs think and American innovators work, and to share success stories. We're going to talk to government officials about how to put in place regulation that promotes innovation, promotes job creation. Goodness, 1 million people here in India are coming on the job market every month. So job creation is critical, and clean tech has enormous potential.
You are right. Clean tech really is the space where we see globally a lot of opportunity because energy demands are going to increase more and more in the future. One thing that I would like to understand from you is, how do you see the government as a clean tech technology consumer in the United States, and how this thing can rub off in the Indian scenario as well.
I'm told that buildings themselves are some of the greatest contributors to the problem. And that if you can save, as I think your prospectus or your website said, 10% or so, that's an enormous amount of money. And the question that I have is, how do you can you quantify that? Can you quantify the actual dollars that are saved? Can you quantify the percentage of CO2 that is prevented from entering the atmosphere? If governments themselves, government facilities and government buildings are probably extraordinary contributors to the problem.
Right.
So it seems to me that you're in the right place at the right time. The question is your business scalable? Is it India only, or can it be scaled? Can you engage with major countries in China and the United States and other large CO2 contributors?
Actually, if you look at it, the primary consumer or that we target are commercial buildings, right? And within commercial buildings, globally, you are right that they are roughly about 40 to 50% of the overall aggregate energy consumption in any countries across the world, whether it's 40 to 50%, whether it's United States or Europe or in India.
It's enormous.
Right. And if we can save 10%, we are talking about 4 to 5% of the total global energy consumption that we can potentially save.
Right.
So the solutions that we build, they are globally scalable. The problems are globally relevant. So yeah, there is actually this association happening at the research support level, at the government level. I think if we can nurture that, like you said, the support between the startups and the companies at the state level, at the individual level, that can go a long way in promoting these kind of partnerships.
But you want to make sure that when you invest, your investment is protected. And if, in fact, your investment is violated, that there's a recourse. There's a way of going to arbitration.
The Young Turks 14 years.
Hello and welcome to this very special edition of Young Turks. I have with me Mr. Charles Rivkin, the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Economic and Business Affairs. I want to now come to Saurabh from Liberate. The company that he runs is in healthcare, connecting doctors with patients in smaller towns and cities of India. Saurabh was also a data scientist with Facebook, so that's another California connection for you.
There's another show on television called Shark Tank where you get to bid on entrepreneurial businesses. I wish I were on that show and I could bid on all 4 of these businesses. I find it fascinating because the double bottom line is doing well and doing good. And you see an opportunity, a hole in the marketplace, but you also are helping a number of people that don't have access to proper medical care. The question I had about your business is, this is a very American frame I'm putting on it, but is liability. How do you factor that into your business model? If the doctors, how does that factor here? Is it scalable? Same question I asked a minute ago, but can you tap into American doctors? Because there's a shortage of doctors was the primary problem, and a way of not connecting them to the populace. Do the doctors need to be only in India? Can you tap into a global supply of doctors to funnel their talents into areas where they're needed? And also, how do you pay for it? I mean, there's so many here that are unbanked, and how do you reach the poor sectors of the country and have them actually pay for the services?
So the way we see it is currently the platform is in a stage where it has been open to doctors across India, and we have had interest from doctors in states in Europe as well to be able to offer these services to patients across the globe. I think the international laws, particularly in US, restrict the doctors to practice outside their home state. So I think regulation has to come in which a platform like ours is open to doctors outside India as well. The second part of the question with regards to the payment mechanisms, what we do and we are trying to do is to enable offline payment mechanisms.
That's smart.
So when the patient is visiting to the doctor first time, he takes the payment offline in cash, which is the instrument that the patient is already aware of. And then he goes back, gets the report done, snap a photograph, and he opens the Liberate app, share a photograph, and boom, it sends to the doctor. And then the doctor, based on the report, can diagnose, can offer a solution. and maybe prescribe certain medications as well.
Right. So one of the points that Saurabh brought up was around regulation. And if we do want to see a global economy being built around innovation, we will have to have regulations in all countries, the first world, the second and the third, open up, become more democratic in that sense. What are the kind of measures, if at all, you all are taking consciously to open up regulation to allow this cross-connection of not just talent, but entrepreneurial ventures, that sometimes the only bar is regulation, and that's one of the things that Saurabh is pointing out.
The fundamental presence for any investor of transparency and predictability and the rule of law are essential if you want to be comfortable about making an investment, about FDI. None of these entrepreneurs are going to want to create a company in a country that doesn't protect their intellectual property rights. And so if they find that their rights aren't being protected, they're probably going to leave. And I think it's important that we create that level of transparency and predictability. And I'm excited because I know that the Indian government is coming out with a copyright position. We collaborated with them, we worked with them, and I know that that's coming out. I think they say in the next couple of weeks. It's the national IPR policy.
So Akash from GreyOrange actually had some thoughts around intellectual property, around patents, and he wanted actually a more favorable patent regime in India, something comparable to what you have in the United States.
Right. So I think for a company like GreyOrange, where the products are based off very disruptive technologies being the core of the products that we make, I think for us IPR has been one of the most important part of our value, right? So we already filed like around 15 patents across India and the world. But I think it's really important that the IPR practices are transparent, and where you can see commercial viability out of IPR in India as well. And I understand US as an ecosystem has built it brilliantly.
That's a bigger question, or a bigger part of the answer would be how to come to an agreement, a high standard agreement between the two countries that protects investment in general. Because the Indian investment in the United States has dramatically increased, and American investment in India has dramatically increased. And we think something worth exploring is a bilateral investment treaty, or what we call a BIT. It's something that my bureau, the Bureau of Economic and Business Affairs, negotiates as a co-lead with USTR, and we're exploring right now with the Indian government. The reason it's important is that investment treaty is similar to an investment chapter in a trade deal, and we've just done a massive trade deal with the Pacific Rim, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We're negotiating a massive trade deal with Europe, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. We're doing a bilateral investment treaty negotiation with China. We've done 24 rounds. And wouldn't it be interesting, at least we're going to put our heads together and see whether it's possible, if America and India together could come up with a high standard bilateral investment treaty that would protect investment on both sides, and with it protect intellectual property rights.
What are some of the salient features of this that we might expect? To your mind, what should be, and I know the nitty-gritties of the policy, I'm not asking you about that, but in the broader framework, what should be the approach to building out something like the BIT?
Well, when you're doing a bilateral investment treaty, you want to make sure that sovereign enterprises are addressed, to make sure there's not unfair competition, to make sure there's complete transparency so that the laws don't change without you being aware of them after you've made your investment. Contract sanctity. You have to believe in the rule of law. You can't find out that a contract is invalid, or the rules have changed, or that somebody has received preferential treatment over an American or Indian investor in the respective countries. So this is about laying the rules of the road at the highest possible standards, just to generalize, because these treaties are very weedy and very deep and very complicated. But you want to make sure that when you invest, your investment is protected. And if in fact your investment is violated, that there's a recourse. There's a way of going to arbitration to make sure that your investment is fairly taken care of.
Football doesn't just have to be the antithesis to cricket, rather it can create other opportunities using Indians' very strong skill sets.
Well, maybe a corollary business could be promoting cricket in the United States.
Certainly, yeah.
The Young Turks 14 years.
Hello and welcome to this very special edition of Young Turks. I have with me Mr. Charles Rivkin, the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Economic and Business Affairs, and also a group of young Indian startups who are building innovative businesses out of India, but really for the world. That brings us to what Jackson is doing with the Grand Slam Baseball League in India. What was the starting point for you to do this, and what have been some of the synergies in working with the U.S. Embassy here in India to get this off the ground?
Sure. Well, before answering that, I just want to say, Mr. Rivkin, it's very exciting to have you here as an American who's lived in India for 18 years. Really why we started baseball over here was not to challenge cricket, but to create opportunities that may not exist for Indians at the moment. Cricket is a very competitive space where you have a national side with only 11 players, but an entire country with that dream, whereas baseball provides opportunities to study abroad, have careers abroad. At our leagues alone, they come to the United States Embassy every Saturday and they're able to play alongside 15 different countries, really get a sense of what sporting culture means in America, what it means to all the other communities that they interact with. So certainly a priority for us is to fulfill our mission before we attend to our shareholders, and that's actually a question I had for you, Mr. Assistant Secretary, is that for a social enterprise like our own, where we are more concerned with growing Indian baseball rather than serving our shareholders directly, is there a special strategy that the United States government has to deal with these sort of international partnerships?
I can say that that in addition to being a social enterprise, it could be a profitable enterprise.
Certainly.
And those aren't diametrically opposed. But what it also does is something our embassy here and the State Department in general cares deeply about, and that's people-to-people ties. You're increasing the people-to-people ties and the cultural bond that exists. And I was just giving a speech, actually, about how cricket and baseball may have different terms, but there's a lot they have in common in terms of the passion that goes into each of them. And sports, by the way, is an IP-centric business. I was curious if $1 Million Arm played here, and if $1 Million Arm impacted what your thoughts, and whether one way to do it would be, have you talked about partnering with Major League Baseball? Certainly Major League Baseball would want people like you in countries like this.
I think they do, and $1 Million Arm, in fact, was a big help for us. That came out about 2 years ago, and we were lucky enough to have Rinku Singh, one of the players.
Yeah.
He's come to help us out in camps and really been a great face for Indian baseball. And it's also got the conversation started here about baseball doesn't just have to be the antithesis to cricket, rather it can create other opportunities using Indians' very strong skill sets, because I really feel that Indians have stronger cultural capital in sports than they give themselves credit for, and we just want to create opportunities for them to flex that and really show off to the world that there are opportunities out here for Indian athletes. I think what's really interesting now is that we're seeing Indians crave sports more than they ever have in the past. You have the success of the Indian Premier League for cricket. Basketball is really taking off here, baseball as well. And what we really want to do is not just create the sport or create an imported version of the sport, but cultivate a very Indian culture within baseball, let it take on its own meaning locally, so that by the time players do reach the professional level in the United States, something that we are talking about with major league clubs right now, and a few NCAA clubs, we will also have a strong local culture that will give a lot more power to these players that do reach such heights.
Well, maybe a corollary business could be promoting cricket in the United States.
Certainly, yeah.
But things that tie our cultures together, in addition to providing jobs and employment, are wonderful. And I applaud you for these efforts, which obviously are born out of passion. You obviously must love baseball.
Completely. I started playing here when I was 5 years old, and it was the one thing that helped me feel American as a Delhiite.
You spoke earlier about what makes an entrepreneur and what we have in common. And I got to believe with these four gentlemen sitting here that passion is a core criteria. Clearly, you wouldn't be doing what you're doing on baseball if you weren't passionate. And you spoke earlier about how individuals can make a difference. It's not just large buildings or large institutions, but individual actions. Finding a niche, but you obviously love it, or you wouldn't be doing it and spending all your life doing it.
So on that note, thank you, Mr. Rivkin, for your time and for joining us and for having this very open conversation with all the entrepreneurs here. Thank you very much to our viewers for joining us. We'll see you next week.
The Young Turks' 14 years